Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're all in the security world, and I think this is going to be right up your alley. We're going to be taking a look at the role of the private sector in counterterrorism,
Okay.
and we're going to be focusing on some of the thought-provoking insights from security expert Jonathan Alvarez.
Right.
And, it's not just about, what private security does. It's also about and some of the common misconceptions and how private companies balance business with national security.
Yeah, it's really interesting because he poses some really great questions in his analysis that make you kind of think about all the different facets.
Yeah, like right off the bat, he talks about the challenges in public-private partnerships.
Right.
Especially around, information sharing and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And he highlights InfraGard as a potential solution. But then he asks this really pointed question.
Mm-hmm.
Who's footing the bill for all this collaboration?
Mm.
Is the financial burden disproportionately falling on private companies?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it leads into this theme that Alvarez explores. Mm-hmm. The sort of unspoken economic incentives for private sector involvement in counterterrorism. So think about Las Vegas, right? Mm. Their economy is built on tourism.
Yeah.
A major security incident could be devastating. So is it even fair to frame it as burden sharing when businesses have such a huge stake in preventing attacks?
That's a good point. And it leads us to another myth, actually, that Alvarez challenges, right? Which is this idea that private security plays an insignificant role in counterterrorism. And he actually throws out a pretty jarring statistic, which is the private sector owns and operates over 75% of U.S. critical infrastructure.
Wow.
So if you think private security is just about mall cops.
Think again.
Exactly.
Yeah, that statistic totally changes the conversation, right?
Yeah.
If we're talking about protecting critical infrastructure from terrorism, and we're talking about the private sector being on the front lines, this isn't just a supporting role, it's a leading role.
And it also, completely dismantles that other misconception that Alvarez mentions, which is that profit always trumps security. If a terrorist attack can cripple your entire industry, you would be investing heavily in prevention.
Right.
It seems like good business sense and national security kind of align pretty strongly in that scenario.
Absolutely, but it's not always that simple. And Alvarez is really trying to push us to consider the complexities here. He outlines a bunch of ways that companies try to strike this balance, complying with regulations, being proactive with security measures, cooperating with law enforcement, and even innovating within the field. But he also leaves us with a question, is it enough?
Right, and he specifically highlights the importance of training and vetting security personnel.
Yes.
Especially as threats evolve.
Yeah.
But, he also questions whether current standards are sufficient. Are we investing enough in the people who are quite literally on the front lines?
That's a good question, and it leads us to another crucial distinction that Alvarez makes, which is the inherent differences between private security and traditional law enforcement or military approaches, right?
Sure.
So private securities authority is usually limited to private property.
Yeah.
They're focused on protecting specific assets and interests. But then Alvarez throws out this almost provocative question, what if those legal frameworks change?
What if private security starts operating with expanded powers? It's a fascinating and potentially concerning idea to consider. What would the implications be?
I mean, it raises a whole bunch of questions, right? About accountability oversight, even potential conflicts of interest,
Right.
And Alvarez doesn't really offer any easy answers, but it makes us think about all these really complex legal and ethical dilemmas that come up.
And he also pushes us to think about how private security stays ahead of the curve, especially with threats constantly changing. He talks about, continuous training, collaboration with law enforcement, and adopting advanced technology like, GSOC systems and tactile trailer cameras.
Right.
But his key question here is, are we keeping pace?
Yeah, and he specifically calls out, the rise of cyber terrorism.
Right.
And points out that securing, physical spaces isn't enough anymore.
Yeah.
Companies have massive amounts of data.
Yes.
And if that data is compromised, it can have really devastating consequences. So he asks, are we equipping private security professionals with the cybersecurity skills they need?
And are we really utilizing technology to its full potential? He gives that example of AI-powered surveillance systems where algorithms are analyzing footage in real time, flagging potential threats, even predicting security breaches before they happen.
Yeah.
I was incredible to think about the possibilities. But Alvarez also asks, are we ready for the ethical implications of such powerful technology?
It's a question we can't ignore, right? And Alvarez argues that staying ahead of the curve isn't just about like adopting the latest gadgets. It's about like really critically assessing how those technologies impact, privacy, civil liberties, and even like the very definition of security itself.
He also emphasizes that human element.
Yes.
Highlighting, the importance of communication and collaboration, not just within private security teams,
Right.
but also between the private and public sectors.
Yeah.
He stresses that building strong relationships with law enforcement is crucial for effective counterterrorism efforts. But his underlying question is, are we doing enough to foster these relationships? Are we truly breaking down silos and sharing information effectively?
Yeah, because he makes the point that private security is often the first on the scene during incidents and acting as like those crucial eyes and ears before law enforcement arrives.
Exactly.
So then that raises the question, are those initial interactions like smooth and coordinated? Are we leveraging the strengths of both sectors to create a truly unified response?
It's a critical point. And ultimately, all these questions that Alvarez raises lead to a larger reflection on the future of private security and its role in counterterrorism. And he seems to suggest that we're at a turning point where private security is becoming increasingly integrated with public safety efforts. But he challenges us to think about what that means for the future.
He doesn't give us any concrete predictions or anything like that.
Right.
But he encourages us to consider the possibilities, the challenges, and the ethical considerations that come with this evolving landscape.
Right.
And he really wants us to think about how we can shape this future, ensuring that private security is a force for good, effectively contributing to a safer and more secure world.
It's a fascinating and challenging call to action. And to really bring these ideas to life, I'd love to explore some real-world examples that Alvarez uses to illustrate his points.
Absolutely. Let's dive into those.
Alvarez couldn't, get into specifics about every case, but he did highlight the aftermath of the 2017 Las Vegas shooting as a really powerful example.
Yeah, and he focused on the immediate response, how private security personnel worked alongside law enforcement, in those chaotic first moments. And, obviously we can't know all the details, but it's clear that they played a crucial role.
It makes you think about how private security is often, that first line of defense, those initial eyes and ears on the ground.
Exactly. They're, gathering information, controlling access, potentially even providing medical aid while waiting for first responders.
And Alvarez also points to the massive security upgrades that happened across Las Vegas after that tragedy.
Yeah, but he doesn't present it as just a lessons learned situation, though. It's more did we learn the right lessons? Did those changes actually address the vulnerabilities that, were exposed that night?
That's a really good point, because it wasn't just about, increasing security presence or adding new technology. It was about fundamentally rethinking security protocols and the role of private security in public safety.
Exactly.
And that ties back to all the questions we've been, exploring throughout this whole deep dive, right?
Yeah.
What is the future of private security? How do we balance business interests with national security? How do we harness technology without, sacrificing ethics?
Right.
It feels like we're at the cusp of something big, a real shift in how we approach security, as a society.
And Alvarez leaves us with a really interesting final thought, that question. How do you see all of this evolving over the next 5 years? What role are you going to play in shaping the future of private security and its impact on counterterrorism?
It's a challenge to all of us, in the security field to keep asking those tough questions, to keep pushing for innovation, collaboration, and those ethical solutions. That's what this whole deep dive has been about.
Yeah, it's about understanding, how complex things are, confronting the challenges, and ultimately working together to try to create a safer world.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of private sector security and counterterrorism. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. And until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay vigilant.